Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips is challenging Joe Biden for the presidency. He announced his run yesterday, telling CBS's Robert Costa he has to. Let's watch.
I am. I have to. I think President Biden has done a spectacular job for our country, but it's not about the past. This is an election about the future. I will not sit still. I will not be quiet in the face of numbers that are so clearly saying that we're going to be facing an emergency next November.
This as President Biden's job approval rating support among Democrats dropped to its lowest point yet. According to Gallup, it dipped 11 percentage points in the last month, jumping from 86% to 75% among Democrats, his worst performance with the party to date. Democrats' downgrade knocked his overall approval rating to an abysmal 37%. Biden enjoyed poll numbers between 49 to 57% in the first 8 months, but Gallup is showing that it has slipped ever since, hitting below 40% 4 times.
The poll taken between October 2nd through the 23rd in the midst of the Hamas attack earlier this month, that same poll revealed Democrat sympathies are higher for Palestinians than for Israelis, a first, which could explain Biden's dwindling approval. It sharply fell following the October 7th attack, which Biden promptly promised to back Israel. So I think this is not surprising to me that Biden is slipping in the polls, not just because he's vowed to back Israel, but I think his whole handling of what's happened since October 7th, initially saying that there were 40 beheaded babies and then having that questions, and then him admitting that he didn't have any evidence to support his earlier claim that he saw photos of it, that there was no confirmation of that. I think that really hurt Biden in the polls and the way that a lot of the Democratic base thinks about him. I think also they sowed a lot of anti-imperialist sentiment among their base when they were supporting the war in Ukraine. And I think a lot of that anti-imperialist sentiment carried over to people's thinking on the issue between Israel and Palestine and the land claims and the occupation and the blockade on Gaza. And so I think Biden shouldn't be surprised he's slipping in the polls, but I also don't think Dean Phillips is the response. I think for the same reasons a lot of Democratic voters don't want to vote for Joe Biden, they won't vote for a Dean Phillips either.
I honestly had never even heard of Dean Phillips before his announcement, so I was kind of surprised that he decided that he was the guy to take on Biden. I found the cognitive dissonance kind of amazing, though, between his claim that Biden has done a great job with, of course, the fact that voters don't want him to run again, and also largely disapprove across parties of the job that he's been doing as president. It kind of implies that he thinks that the American voters are stupid, like they don't understand how great the Biden administration has been for them. And this has sort of been a consistent theme among members of the Democratic establishment, where they explain away these falling poll numbers as evidence that the media is somehow against them or isn't doing a good enough job of selling the successes of the Biden administration. And then when you ask about the successes, it's like, well, he passed legislation that nobody liked. I mean, it's truly mind-blowing to hear them try to justify the lack of support for Biden. And so for him to come out and say, well, he's done a great job, but it's not about the past, it's about the future, is honestly just baffling to me.
My favorite part of the whole Dean Phillips thing is Politico reporting that among top Democrats behind closed doors, they're calling this campaign Dean Phillips' midlife crisis. I think that's amazing to just call it what it is. This is a vanity project. It could end his political career. He's another millionaire businessman with not a strong policy vision for the country. It seems like a midlife crisis. It seems like this is the first time I'm agreeing with top Democratic strategists. And to be honest, with Biden sitting on, $91 million? That's a huge treasure chest to run his campaign. Dean Phillips is going to have a really tough time running against Joe Biden and joining this late in the race. And I'm in the Midwest right now. I'm in Iowa. And Dean Phillips is from the Midwest. He's not even well known here. People don't even know who he is here. So I don't think that can stop someone from becoming the United States president. But I think if you're going to run and you're going to be this kind of moderate, middle of the road candidate, you at least need the backing of the establishment, because you very clearly don't have the backing of the American people.
Yeah, he definitely can't position himself as some kind of anti-establishment guy. And I think it's kind of funny. He is a millionaire, and he apparently started a gelato business. That's how he got all of his money, which is sort of like the perfect encapsulation of the Democratic elite, like a guy who just got rich selling gelato. I think is really funny. Kind of reminds me of the expensive ice cream in Nancy Pelosi's freezer in the middle of the pandemic when she did her little kitchen tour. But yeah, I agree. Vanity project. Normally when people have a midlife crisis, they go out and buy a Corvette, and yet here he is deciding to run for president. I guess that's what you do when you have more money and power than you know what to do with. But we'll see what happens. I'm curious to get your thoughts on a little bit more about the Israel-Palestine conflict and why people are turning away from Biden. So we know that Democrats have had solid footing among Muslim voters, but his perceived lack of support for Palestine could impact his run in particularly the battleground state of Michigan, which has a sizable Muslim population. Voters in this voting bloc issued a stark warning for Democrats that they'll lose votes over Israel backing. Moreover, House Democrats from the Great Lakes state have refused to hold a vote condemning Hamas for lobbying the brutal attack earlier this month, killing 1,400 people.
So according to the AP, some Michigan voters are particularly peeved that the state's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, skipped a pro-Palestine rally in Dearborn, one of the biggest Muslim and Arab community enclaves in the United States. But he did not attend one, or he did attend one that was pro-Israel. So attending this refusing to attend this pro-Palestine rally in a community where there's a huge Muslim and Arab population, but then going to a pro-Israel community, I think a lot of progressives, especially those who are Muslim, but especially those who are young, this is a defining issue for a candidate and someone who's really framed themselves as a progressive hero. I think this is really going to hurt Governor Gretchen Whitmer, as a candidate. If you want the progressive vote, if you want Democrats' votes on this issue, you're going to need to adjust how you behave in public. People are paying attention. And I think this is going to be a decisive issue for the candidate, not just because of how this issue polls among Arab and Muslim voters, but how it polls among young voters, which have delivered a lot of seats for Democrats across the country.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask you is it enough to stay neutral in the conflict, I guess you could say? Because my general position on it is that this is a 1,000-year-old land dispute. I think both sides have behaved heinously, first with obviously Hamas's attack on October 7th, then you have Israel responding with the sort of inordinate bombing of Gaza. Is it enough to say the U.S. shouldn't be involved because it's not directly in our interest, they need to figure it out themselves? Or do you think that Biden has to take an actively pro-Palestinian stance? Because when I see some of these protests and I see left-wing activists papering over the posters of people who are held hostage by Hamas with the word occupier, or ripping the flyers down, or I see them burning the Israeli flag, I don't want any part of that.
I think if you're a candidate and you want the progressive vote or you want the Democratic vote, I think right now you need to hold the position that you don't support what Netanyahu's government is doing, that you don't support war crimes being committed, that at the very least you don't support the carpet bombing and the blockade on Gaza. I mean, we have the Israeli government admitting to committing war crimes and the United States funding them. I think the bare minimum is to not break the Leahy Act as a law, which suggests that the United States cannot send funds to another country that is committing human rights violations. I think that's the bare minimum for a lot of Democrats. I think Jewish Voice for Peace has been a really good advocate on this issue and explaining to candidates where they'd like for them to stand, and that it's very clear to them that supporting the Netanyahu regime does not mean that you support Israeli or Jewish people necessarily. And so I really think that that's the bottom line. That's the bare minimum for a candidate. If you say that you're not going to support Israel's, terrible carpet bombing of Gaza, continuing to give them aid while they continue to take more land, you have to support no more expansion from Israel, I think. Bottom line, you have to support a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause, and you can't keep giving Israel's military aid. I think that's the floor for a lot of Democrats, and I think the more progressives would like the United States to actually change how they side on this issue in a similar way to how the U.S. did on the issue of South African apartheid. For a long time, we were supportive of the apartheid government in South Africa, and then we said, you know what? This is actually wrong. This is actually an occupation. The people that we have been calling terrorists, who, by the way, did commit acts of violence. They did bomb people to get their point across that they needed the apartheid to end, that they were living under an occupation. They were considered terrorists. And then the United States said, okay, we're now recognizing that you're freedom fighters, and we're going to have Nelson Mandela be president, and we're going to change how we feel about this. The U.S. only did that after the entire international community changed their view. So I think a lot of people who are progressives and Democrats and who vote in the direction of anti-war and peace would really like the administration to have that pivotal moment like it did in South Africa with Palestine today, and really fight for peace in the region and really get a lot of that Palestinian land back. We have Gaza separate from the West Bank now. The way that that land has changed over many, many years since the Nakba in 1948, I think is something that the United States would like their government to reckon with. It's a very different Israel from the Israel that was created in 1948. And I really think the United Nations needs to come together and address what kind of a solution we can have for peace in the region, not support the continued bombing by Israel and vetoing a ceasefire on the floor of the United Nations. The Biden administration is very far from, I think, even where the floor is for a lot of Democrats.
I know we're going to get into this more later in the program, but for now we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Rising.